Hey everybody, welcome to Technical. Today we're going to do a top 5, because people seem to like top 5s. People like their information in neat and orderly packages for easy consumption, so that's what we'll be doing today. Today's top 5 is going to be all about popular, permeating, and persisting myths that are floating around the internet about PC building in general that I want to address, and that I repeatedly address over and over again on forums and on Reddit, trying to dispel these myths and set people straight. So stay tuned, and I hope you learn something. All right, first up, we're going to talk about power supply wattages. So AMD and NVIDIA, on their product pages, whenever they release a new graphics card, will always have a recommended power supply wattage listed on the product page of the given card. Now, the reasons they do this are twofold. One, they have to assume that you purchased a power supply that cannot deliver the rated wattage on the label. This was true for a lot of Cooler Master units back in the day, and it's still true in some cases today. Secondly, they have to assume that you have an older power supply that might not necessarily have a strong enough 12-volt rail to power a graphics card. You can usually tell if it's meant to power a graphics card by its native connectors. Simply put, don't use Molex to 6-pin adapters. Bottom line is, the recommended PSU wattage on the product page is grossly overblown. If you've seen build vlog number 2, I believe, which was my $376 console killer, that had a GTX 670 and an i5 2400, all powered by a 430 watt Seasonic power supply, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You do not need a 650 watt power supply to power a single graphics card system, even if you're overclocking. That is gross overkill. So the point I'm trying to make is, do your research, understand what these components actually draw, and you can do that by reading reviews and then make your purchase accordingly. Don't overbuy. Which leads me into my second topic, power supply branding. So one thing I want you to understand is that EVGA and Corsair and Antec and Enermax, they don't actually make power supplies. They commission designs of power supplies from companies that actually make them. And then the companies like Seasonic and Superflower, we'll go with Flower because it makes more sense. Companies like Seasonic and Superflower, they actually make the stuff in their factories and make minor changes based on what the brander recommends. And then from there, you get your power supply. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes Seasonic has to take their manufacturing process and outsource it to somebody else. The bottom line is, the only way you can tell if a power supply is going to be any good is by trusting a person who has it in their hands and was able to test it. Johnny Guru, Hardware Secrets, Hard OCP, all of these websites do very good in-depth reviews of power supply units, and you need to stay on the ball when making a purchase and do adequate research. A power supply, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is the most critical component in your build. If it fails, it can potentially take everything else with it, so do your reading. The only instance in which the power supply brander should matter to you is with regards to warranty service. EVGA offers 10-year warranties on all of their Superflower and Seasonic units, which is great, which means that they are likely designed to last you for several builds into the future. Largely speaking, comes out to an investment of $10 to $15 a year for something that's going to last you a very long time. Take advantage of the warranty service. Make sure they're good. Make sure that they're an honorable, trustworthy company and are going to take care of you. And you can definitely factor that into your purchase decision. Topic number 3 for the day. That's not 3, that's a 5. Topic number 3 for the day, blower-style graphics cards. Now, there's this gross misconception floating around the internet that blower-style cards are strictly worse than the open-air variants that you see coming from AIB partners after release. Now, in general, I will say that most people should buy an open-air card. It's probably a good idea, especially for full-size cases, but blower-style cards have a very specific purpose. They are meant to take air from the inside of your case, collect it in the card, and jettison it right out the back. All of it, for the most part. 95% of the air comes out the back. Now, this is good for cases that have high internal temperatures. Now, why do you care about high internal temperatures? Well, power supplies, for example, usually are rated to operate with intake temperatures of no greater than 50 degrees. And some of them even go as low as 40 or 45. So if you have an internal case temperature that is 45 degrees, and you have your power supply oriented in such a way that it's drawing air from the inside of your case and jettisoning it out the back, that is bad. It could trigger the overtemp protection on your power supply and shut down your whole system. Doesn't happen often, but it can happen. So you have to design your system accordingly. Not all of your components can share the internal air for heat dissipation. You have to have some way to get it out of the case, whether it be through additional exhaust fans. Typically speaking, the smaller the case you get, the smaller the envelope you've got, and the less air volume you have to play with, the more diligent you have to be about directing airflow out of the case and keeping the internal temperatures from getting too hot. Furthermore, reference cards are not the only way to get a blower style card. There are AIB cards that have improved upon the formula, and they have designed their own blower systems where they have slightly larger impellers. Sometimes they're double-sided, sometimes the vapor chamber inside is better. Whatever the case may be, they perform better, they're factory OC'd, so you don't necessarily have to sacrifice those higher clocks just to get a blower. Myth number 4, Newegg reviews are useless. Now this is something that is more of a general philosophical point than something that is specific to computers. So if you have ever researched the topic of crowd wisdom, you'll know what I'm about to talk about in great detail. Crowd wisdom is the idea that you can take anything with a quantifiable value, you can take a crowd of 10,000 people, have them guess at it, and they will, on the average, be right. Jelly beans, for example. You can look up a video on YouTube of a guy named Darren Brown who runs this exact experiment on a crowd of people. He takes something like a few hundred people, puts them in a room with a jelly bean jar, and it says to them, guess how many jelly beans are in that jar? And then you have people who are like, well, there's obviously 5,000. And then there's another person who's like, well, it's like no more than 600. And of course, the individual results are just wildly off. But if you take the sum of the parts, you add them up and divide them by the number of people, it turns out the answer is usually right within 3%. Newegg reviews can be viewed in the same light. Don't read one review. Don't read 5. Just look at the aggregation of the scores, and that gives you a good leaping point from which to start your research. So don't put all your eggs, pun intended, in that basket, but don't discount them either, because it usually is an excellent place to start. Number 5, AIO water cooling is inherently better than air cooling. This is absolute nonsense and total bullshit. First of all, let me start by saying that 120mm radiators are crap. They are good enough to dissipate the heat from a CPU on the order of about what you'd get from a Hyper 212 Evo. What they are useful for, and I mentioned this in part 3 of this video, is that they result in directed airflow. They allow you to mount a radiator in the back of your case with a fan directly on it that shoots air right out the back and keeps it from internally heating your case. That is good, but it is not going to do any better of a job at cooling your CPU than an air cooler would do of comparable TDP dissipation, and so on. Similarly, 240, 280mm radiators are going to be much better, but you're going to get similar performance from something like an NH-D15 from Noctua. So basically, it all depends, again, on what kind of airflow and what kind of envelope configuration you're going for. The goal is to keep all of your components below their rated maximum. That's all you care about. You don't give a shit about idle temperatures. You don't care about any of that. All you care about is, if I'm running my system at full fucking load, GPU, CPU to the max, the power supply is sweating like a motherfucker, am I going to run into temperature problems where I'm not getting the most out of my components? And if air cooling gives you that result just as well as water cooling, you're good to go. Another point I want to bring up about AIOs is that the number of failure points that is introduced from an AIO is increased dramatically. A heatsink with a fan slapped on it has one failure point, and that's the fan. And if the fan goes, the heatsink itself is usually sufficient to keep the CPU cool in idle conditions until you get home and find out what's wrong. AIO's not so good. You've got tubing, you've got fittings, you've got the pump itself, you've got the fans, you have the radiator that could leak, you've got a bunch of things that could potentially go wrong. Now, I don't want to scare you off AIO coolers. They're fine. 99% of the time, you will not encounter these problems. I'm presently using one in this system, so I'm not necessarily bashing them, but what I'm saying is that you have to understand the concept of risk mitigation. You have to feel comfortable with whatever choice you make. And if putting water in your system still makes you uncomfortable, and there is good reason that it should, just avoid it. You'll have adequate performance in 99% of scenarios with an air cooler. Just choose what makes the most sense for you. Also, I want to mention that air coolers last forever. It's a heatsink made out of solid metal. As long as you take good care of it, it will survive you several builds into the future. People still have Hyper 212s from like years ago. Anyway, I think we're going to call it one a video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Follow me on Twitter at OFA. Hit me up on Reddit if you have any questions. I think the next video I'm going to do is going to be specifically about buying used power supplies, which is a topic that comes up a lot, and whether or not I think it's safe and how often I do it and so on. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.